Okay. All right. Okay. I'm Nicole.
I'm Allie.
And this is Acknowledge Knowledge. All right, so welcome to our first episode of Acknowledge Knowledge, where we are just two ADHD queer bitches that are gonna educate the world. And today's topic is neurodivergence. It's a good one to start off with because it'll help you get to know us a little bit better and kind of make a little bit more sense of the chaos that this podcast is going to be.
Yeah, there will be a lot of, I mean, as you can see, I literally have my notes here and I have no shame in just reading them as we talk about stuff, because otherwise I will panic and forget. So
you know what I forgot to include in my notes?
What?
The definition of neurodivergence.
I was reading that earlier because I was like, what if we talk about neurodivergence and then I can't even explain what it is, because I panic and then all the information flies out of my
Do you have the
brain.
actual definition? Because I can explain it in a way that people can understand, but
I'd rather you explain it, because
So, neurodivergence, in my understanding of it, and based off of the definition as being somebody that is neurodivergent, is the way that our brain works is just different. So there's a lot of different things that can cause your brain to be neurodivergent, including things like dyslexia, dyscalculia,
dyspraxia, I think.
Dyspraxia, thank you.
Yes.
Good
Yes.
God. Language is not my number one special skill. Learning disabilities and Tourette's, that's an interesting one. I didn't know that. And then there's the ones that most people do know about: ADHD, autism, other mental health disorders. And one thing that I find really interesting is the fact that you can acquire neurodivergence due to things like giftedness or a really high IQ and awareness of the world kind of causes your brain and the synapses to connect differently, and it causes your brain to wire itself differently. So you have the same kind of effect as people that are born neurodivergent. It just means that the way that a normal, I hate that word, that a neurotypical person's brain works and the way that society is arranged around neurotypical people isn't what comes naturally or normally to us. So they look at things like social cues, that's a big one. Following the status quo is one of the number one things that I think shows neurodivergence, or makes it clear to other people, other than stimming. Following the status quo is one of the number one things, and that was one of the things that we wanted to talk about. So one of the things that we noticed in ourselves and in other people with neurodivergence is the tendency to question the world, to ask why. So I know when I was growing up, I would get so much backlash or so many upset teachers, people in authority positions that would get so upset with me because I would ask why. And as somebody now that works in education, that was a teacher, that has been a mentor to children, and just existing in this world for so long, I hate that people did that to me, because why is such an important question. If you don't ask why, if you don't understand why, then we can't make change. So I can think back all the way to in high school when I was taking a math course, and we were doing some kind of probability and statistics with dice, and based off of whatever we had just learned and the basic concepts, what the formula was or whatever didn't make sense. So I was trying to ask her to explain it to me, how that actually works, mathematically. And she was she had no clue. And I was but this, and then she had no clue. And it's that's fine. We don't always know, but we shouldn't also get mad at somebody for asking why.
Yeah.
Because the why is really important.
Yeah. The why, I feel like with me, it was, and I've told you this story before, but like the time that I grew up in the Bible Belt in Texas, and I would be going to church as people in their youth did, and I was just like in it like the rest of everybody, in that like I was just playing along and feeding into the narrative that was given to me, because in some element you are a product of your environment, but when you are neurodivergent and your brain is working a little bit differently, you start to be like, you know what, but this doesn't make sense to me. And so I started questioning things, essentially asking why. And the more I asked why, the more people would get mad at me. And I was in a specific church setting where I was asking a lot of questions about religion, about spirituality, about different things, to the point where the pastor of that youth organization was like, you know what, God doesn't like when we ask questions. And not that this is a conversation around religion, but more so of like I felt so stunted in that moment of being like, why are you cutting me off from a natural curiosity? And then I think I literally responded of like, well, then why did God give me the ability to ask questions? Like, if he doesn't want me to ask questions, like, why, so it was just like, it was more whys after that. And I realized in that moment, like, okay, this specific avenue for me isn't giving me the clarity that I'm so curiously and naturally seeking in the world. And I felt shame in that, of like, why is my brain working this way and nobody can accommodate the way that
What's
it's
so
operating.
crazy too is that we have these experiences from our childhood, but it doesn't fucking end there.
Yeah.
Like, I have a master's in education, and during that program I was in we had an internship. So I was interning in this school, and I had my mentor teacher, and she was telling me to do something, and I asked why. I am there to learn how to teach, not to be a robot. So I want to understand why we're doing things, so I can know when I need to do that, why, just to get a better understanding. Now, I'm autistic and I have ADHD, so with autism, like, I want to deeply understand everything that I'm doing. And she got so mad at me for asking why, that she reported me to the school, which is crazy to me, because it's as a teacher, I want my kids to ask me why. Because that shows that they're engaged, that shows that they're learning. You need to question to understand. And we so often, people take that as an insult, and I guess that's, I don't understand what it is to neurotypical people that they take that as an insult, just wanting to know more. I think it feels like an attack, and we get kind of defensive sometimes. But it's like that, there's no harm in that. I'm not saying you're doing something wrong, right? I just want to know why you do it, so I can understand it better. And that communication with a neurodivergent human to a neurotypical, goodness, that can get rough.
And it's honestly, it's wild, because I just had this realization, like, while right now as you were talking,
love that.
as we do, but because I was going into a deep dive for whatever reason when I was preparing for this, like, I was really going down the philosophy rabbit hole of things, because I majored in philosophy. So and I realized
the social sciences.
Oh, we do. And I just realized as we're talking and we're kind of going down this like lane of why, is like philosophy felt like a safe avenue for me to ask that question.
Same for anthropology. Because anthropology is the same kind of way. Like, I literally studied anthropology because I was so sick of people telling me what I had to know. I wanted to find it out for myself. Literally, that's what I told people when I went into anthropology. That's so funny. That's so crazy.
And so when I was going down that rabbit hole this morning, I was like, what is it about philosophy that I felt so drawn to? And it's because there were multiple different possibilities of things. It wasn't just the societal standard of here's what exists. It's like, no, multiple different realities can exist. There's paradoxes, there's theories, and it gave me a safe space to think through something, but it also gave me a safe space to have other options available.
One of my favorite things that we did in anthropology on that note was that when we talked about the history of anthropology and the people that were the foundations of anthropology, we would look at them, we would talk about the importance of them, and then we would talk about all the things that they did wrong that changed over time. Not in a way that was like, these are horrible people and God, they're like idiots. No, like, we learn more and we grow more. And like, we were so taught to challenge our own biases and understand much more deeply that it's really like changed the way that even me, already neurodivergent, I think it threw me deeper into neurodivergence. With that understanding of human behavior and everything like that. It's just so interesting.
And the rabbit hole I went down this morning was around epistemology, which is a field within philosophy that is all around, which is perfect for this podcast. It's about knowledge, the study of knowledge.
Nice.
How do we know that we have knowledge? What are the theories that constitute, like, if this person contains knowledge? And it went down the rabbit hole. Now then it goes sub-branched into social epistemology, which is that theory that, and I hope I explained this correctly, but like, it is the theory that people as a collective have knowledge. And like, how does that work? And when we look at, there are multiple different articles that I want to get into more, and maybe in a different episode we can talk about. Because like,
that sounds fun.
There is a social there's epistemology, and then there are theories within that, specifically as it relates to neurodivergence. So there is like a medical side of it where they look at neurodivergence as like something to be cured. And then there is a social one, which I actually just took a picture because I think it's just important to, I really want to like at least just say.
It's so interesting because I don't think that you will ever meet somebody that is neurodivergent that ever says that they wish they weren't.
Yes.
It is harder to live in the society that we live in.
Yeah.
Because it's not made for us.
Right.
But
yeah,
I do not think that my brain needs to be cured or anything. Like, God, I would never.
Which then you'll love this definition because so the social model is those who accept this model assert that all or most so-called disorders listed in the standard manuals basically are social constructs. They are neither pathological or abnormal. Indeed, the very labels disorders, pathologies, abnormal, divergent phenotypes, deficits, anomalies, and so on are all part of this exclusionary social artifact that reinforces the denial of rights and opportunities to many people who are simply different in some cognitive aspects. And then it says, the defenders of this model, the social model, argue that the subjects having these conditions do not suffer from an illness that needs to be cured. It is society at large that has to change its own narrow discriminatory ways and to open spaces available for everybody to flourish. So
I love that.
I know it's like, that was a huge mouthful, but
I do want to make it clear that we're also not saying that there isn't disorders or there isn't negatives. We're actually going to get into that at the end of this episode. But like, I know that schizophrenia, things like that, like those kinds of disorders, they are really fucking hard to deal with and live with. But again, a lot of like the negative aspects of mental health disorders are due to things like trauma or a lack of acceptance or like, right? So like I have anxiety and depression and all that jazz. And a lot of that is due to an understanding of the world that we live in and the fact that I have to continue to attempt to abide by this society that we live in that's not made for me. So a lot of those anxieties and depression, all of those things that are like very crippling to me are due to the fact that the world is built the way that it is. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and there is the paradox, and that's what I love about like naturally having that philosophical mindset is like the medical model and the social model can exist at the same time, where it's like,
Yeah,
in your point,
that's
like
what's so
we
important.
absolutely recognize there are conditions and severities and things that disrupt people's ability in a day-to-day setting that do need to be addressed, but that like the extreme of one or the other, it doesn't have to be like that. It can always be like that there's some sort of like morph in between.
Which is so interesting. I actually had this conversation with the principal at the learning center. We were talking about how we have these supports for students that have a more significant need for support, right? So we offer like so much resources for them when they need things like speech, if they have a learning disability that's a comorbidity for the students with autism. But what we don't have is supports or is like something that is made for those that aren't high support needs, that don't have high support needs. They're doing well at school, or they are very good at school, but they're perfectionists. They're a lot of things. Like, yes, I know that some of these kids might get a 504 for their ADHD or autism and stuff like that, but there's a lot more that aren't, and they're not getting their supports that they need. Like the kids like me going through school, which I know my generation was worse. Like women were not diagnosed with ADHD or autism when I was a kid. So I understand that, but like even now we don't have the supports or the education or anything that we deserve to support those kids in their less significant needs.
Yeah, especially if you are high masking, if you are inattentive ADHD, where a lot of the turmoil that's going on is like in your head. Like I was one of those kids that flew under the radar, where I was making like C+, B-, like that's like okay, that'll get her done. But nobody saw on my end. It's like you can sometimes see the extreme of ADHD, where like you can be like highly intelligent and you can just be able to like dial into things and be really good at things. But for me, it was like I was having to read the same pages over and over again. The teacher would talk and I would have like an auditory processing issue of like they're literally speaking my language, but I don't know what they're saying to me.
That happens a lot to me, but like even in those moments, like I have very, very good like comprehension skills. So somehow, some way, I can skim a page and read like 20% of it and know what the page says.
Yeah,
so
which
that's
I
what I
do
like
that too.
Had coping. That's the way that I coped with it. Like I didn't read like the full paragraph. I didn't read like everything in the text. I just kind of skimmed it, because if I tried to read it word for word, I would get distracted and all of that jazz. And honestly, ADHD is fuck, because I don't even remember what the point of this.
Honestly, well, that's for the audience to be like, where is this going?
Lost my train of thought. So next up,
can
we? This is gonna end up so long.
No, and I think it's great. And honestly, like the people that are gonna love this are gonna be like, I feel so seen right now, because like maybe the exact thing that we're doing is like maybe preventing people from like starting, because they're like, oh, what if I get off on like a tangent, or what if I do this or that? And it's like, that's literally what we do.
We are, which is why we're starting with neurodivergence. All right, so our next thing is what I wanted to bring up, which is just a cool fact, because like we said, we are ADHD queer bitches. So I want to talk about the correlation between neurodivergence and differences in sexuality and gender. So, fun fact.
Stoked about this one.
Yes. And I do not have the citations because ADHD.
Yeah.
Autistic adults are 8 times more likely to identify as queer.
Tracks.
Males are 3.5 times more likely to be bisexual.
Interesting.
Females, 43% of them are queer. Neurodivergent. Sorry. So males, females, what I just said was the neurodivergent ones. Autistic adults are 8 times more likely to be queer. So it's 2 to 3 times higher than the average. So it's just crazy. Because, but I find this I think, and like I've thought about this like deeply, because even before we looked up those statistics, I was like, I feel like it's true. That's why we looked up the statistics, because I'm always like, this is a fact. Let me make sure it's also a fact. But we question the world, right? Like the whole basis is that we question the world. So one of the things is, yes, of course, like we're wired differently. So, and being queer is something that we just are. But when we question the world, you're more likely to also be willing to question your sexuality, right? Yeah. Like, there's so many people that are probably bisexual, but because you're bisexual, you can just kind of cover up that one side of you if you don't think about it. If you grow up in a society that tells you girl like boy, then you're going to grow up and be like, girl does like boy. Yeah. Girl also kind of like girl, but like, we don't even consider that an option. So you're just like, this must be how we feel to our friends, right?
I feel like we're also
I have no clue.
Yeah, and like we're also very hyper attuned to what is safe for us, because not only outside of queerness is like, as a neurodivergent, you're naturally looking for that sense of safety and that security to be who you are. And I grew up in the South. It wasn't safe to be queer. So it was like, but I had, at the time, identifying as bisexual, I was like, that was something that I just like subconsciously suppressed, where it was just like, I'll just follow the norm because I technically can. Yeah. And the thing that doesn't feel safe to me, I will just kind of like, you know, whatever. But I did know since I was like, I don't know, 12 or 13, I was like,
nice. I just made out with women and thought I was doing it for men. Right, of course. Well, there was also the like internalized misogyny that was going on there, for sure. The lack of like understanding of consent, and we'll go into a trauma episode at one point. We don't need to drop that all on you right away. So that's just a fun little tidbit that I think is really cool. And then our last bit we want to talk about, because this is something that I always emphasize, is that things like neurodivergence, things like ADHD and autism are as much of a superpower as they are a disability. And this applies to like every aspect of our lives. So we kind of wanted to go down in these different categories of work, relationships, and self-growth, and like talk about what parts of our disability are a superpower and which parts of it are actually disabling in those environments.
Do you want to start with work? Like, work is a superpower for you. Like, what is it for you?
I mean, it's both. Definitely. 100% both. Like, for ADHD and autism, I have insanely fast processing speeds. So I understand concepts like very quickly. Yeah. So when I am told to do something, I can grasp that and do it immediately and like 4 times faster. Like over the summer, we were doing like obnoxiously mindless work, which also disability is really hard for me to get myself to do. Yes. But if I get it done quickly, it's better. So it took everyone else 4 days to do what I did in 4 hours. Yeah. Which tracks so hard. I literally can't relate more. And then, like, as a disability, though, like, for work, what is that for you? I would say, well, a lot of it comes from, I think, the autism and the overstimulation. And it's not so much that it impedes my ability to do the work. It impedes my life outside of work, because I am so high masking in a working environment that, and I put myself into a job where I am interacting with people all day long. I am like overstimulated all day long because there was a lot of screaming, there was a lot of yelling, a lot of communicating, and all that stuff. So when I would get home, I would essentially go like nonverbal. Like I would come home and I would kind of dissociate into a book and just try and shut off everything, because it was just so overwhelming that like it just couldn't do it. And then that like noise light sensitivity, those kinds of things, that can be really tough.
Yeah. For me, like work as a strength, as like a superpower, has always been creativity for me.
Ooh, yeah,
creativity, like, which I know that's the same for you too. Like, I am a copywriter, so as a creative person and somebody who like churns out that work, that can be incredibly easy for me. And I also designed my life to be able to do that in the same way of like, some people, it takes them days to do something that it takes me literally a couple hours to do.
Creative problem solving too.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm an insanely good problem solver.
Which can work really well in leadership roles where it's like,
that was
there's a lot of...
Nice point. Yes. Yeah. Literally natural fucking leaders.
Yeah.
We are really natural leaders because we understand things as a whole very large concept. At least I do really well. Yeah. So... yeah, I agree. Sorry, keep going.
Oh no, you're good.
ADHD.
ADHD. Like anytime we do something that's like very ADHD, we're just like ADHD. That Renee rap. Yeah. ADHD.
That's our citation.
Yeah. LOL. That's but the work disability for me genuinely is procrastination, and that has to do with and I actually wrote a LinkedIn post about this like literally yesterday, and that's why it's like feeding into this. I know. I'm just back into LinkedIn all of a sudden. Work for me, if I do not give a shit about what I'm doing, like I will procrastinate. If I'm writing for a brand that I love and that like stimulates me and it gets me excited and I want to do research about it, like I am going to drop the most fire copy that you've ever seen. If I am writing for like a business to business software as a service product, B2B SaaS, like no, I'm literally not functioning.
I got a real good one.
Yeah.
Drafts. I can't fucking do them.
A draft? Like
I can't do a draft. Okay, so like whenever I was doing or writing an IEP, there's a button that would say save as draft or save as final. Bitch, why the fuck would I save it as a draft? It's been a draft this whole time. Why do I need to save it as a draft?
Yeah.
This is just an unnecessary step. I don't like unnecessary steps. Make me angry. They are my ADHD rage.
I think drafts were subconsciously created from perfectionists.
But you do
why is it
not
a draft?
Review it before you save it. Why do I have to save as a draft?
Yeah.
What is the point of that?
Because it's a very autistic question.
It saves in itself. Like it's already saved.
Yeah, that's weird.
It's just like, do you want to finalize this into a document as a draft?
Oh my god, can you imagine an episode where we just ask a bunch of these questions? We're like, why do you do this? Like, it's just like...
that sounds like so much
fun. Just a whole episode of all these questions that we have.
That could be one of our TikTok promotions.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Or just, you guys are getting the raw,
unedited,
unedited. We're figuring this out as we go.
That's freaking hilarious.
Relationships.
Relationships. Okay, I'll go first. I feel like relationships for me, and this is any type of relationship, it doesn't have to just be with like romantic, which I think is especially important like in a queer setting where it's like our relationships, I think we define a lot differently with different emphasis. But like I feel like because I have ADHD, I am able, because of the hyper attentiveness I have to the world, to have a shit ton of compassion for people.
Ooh, empathy. I am horribly empathetic, like so, like it just
could be to a fault.
Impact, like, and like at the same time, that's something that like makes us feel very othered sometimes. Is that like I'm better at feeling other people's emotions than my own.
Yeah, and
which is very wild.
I feel like ADHD actually does, because I think that this is multifaceted. It could have to do with like the work I've done in my life, absolutely. But I feel like ADHD has given me the lens to be able to hold space for people in a way where I'm like, been there, like in a way that like allows people to be themselves and me not judge them for that.
So this is a completely off topic thing, but it that triggered it to me.
I love it.
Something that I find really, really, really important is talking about this stuff, which is part of the reason why we want to have this conversation, why we're starting this, but we don't know, right? Like when I was growing up, nobody talked about ADHD, nobody talked about anxiety, nobody talked about anything bad. Like it was so taboo. Like I even remember like a few years ago, my husband brought up talking about my chronic illness in front of people, and I was like it's like bringing the mood down or whatever, and I was just like, I'm sorry, is my debilitating disease making you uncomfortable?
And you're like, well,
I'm sorry, what?
Like, imagine how it makes me feel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But like, imagine if somebody else is going through something like that. Literally, I just had a little happy hour with some ex-work people, and the one person came to me and she was like, hey, you have lupus, right? Because they were going through a possible lupus diagnosis.
Wow.
And it made her feel more understood, like she had somebody she could talk to.
Yeah.
And that is what is so important to me. Like, that's why I like to share these things. That's why, and I don't even remember what triggered me to go on that tangent. So back to
probably
relationships.
compassion in relationships. Yeah.
But
the notes.
Relationships.
Yeah.
One thing for me that was really hard is, again, the nonverbal thing. So when I've gotten significantly better, like communicating is something that I've been working on for a really long time, like 10 years. When I would get really, really upset, I would shut down and go nonverbal for like 2 days.
Yeah.
Now it's like 5 minutes. So
that's
is
an incredible difference.
Really, really hard in relationships because I struggle to communicate. I also really struggle to communicate emotions effectively. So I have to kind of like go around them to do it effectively. Like things like pain, I can't communicate well, which is really hard when it comes to having a chronic illness. But like I have to be creative about the way that I explain pain because one, my brain doesn't work the same, but also I don't feel things the same. Yeah. So like when they're like, oh, does this hurt? I'm like, well, it feels like you're poking a bruise. Instead of saying yes, because like to me, if I have a bruise, I'm gonna poke it.
Why do we do that?
So like, does it hurt?
Is that a neurodivergent thing?
Stimulating.
Ow, ow, ow.
And I guess I want to get used to it so it doesn't hurt anymore.
Yeah, it's or I'll do it to see if it still hurts. Yeah. I'm like, hello, it's
just
a
like
bruise.
More impulse control. Yeah. But that's definitely one that was tough. But again, with that empathy, like that's so important. Like I can read somebody so well. I am like, and they say that an autistic person absorbs 60% more of their surroundings than anybody else, which is why our brains are so exhausted all the time. But I can read people to an insane level. Like if I can look at somebody and like within 20 minutes, like 20 seconds really, but like give it a while and know if they are a genuine human being. Like
same.
If you are masking something, if you are hiding something about yourself, I will know.
I can tell.
Maybe not what it is, but I will know.
Yeah. It's like it's intuitive.
That's a superpower for shit sure.
Yeah.
Like our intuition is not, and it's we call it intuition, but it's pattern recognition. So I follow these patterns and I come to these conclusions. Sometimes, like I said, with the processing being so fast, I can't communicate or explain to other people how I got to that point. Yeah. But I know that I followed a logical path. Yeah. Because I am insanely logic based.
And I love that because also I feel like the mind gut connection is so powerful, and it'll probably be a different rabbit hole I need to do more research around before I like really dive into it. Yeah. But I recognize like the thought patterns and your body responds to things. Like I have a very strong, like when I have a thought, I'll feel it in my gut. And so when you think like intuition type thing, like that connection of like my body is experiencing something due to something my mind like triggered into that, which like, so I'll feel it more here, but I know it's something that's going on up here. Yeah. Of like, it's almost like subconscious at that point where it's like, I'll get a feeling and I'll know that it has to do with something that I have subconsciously recognized in that other person. And maybe I don't know exactly what it is, but as long as I know that I have that feeling, I'm like, okay, that is telling me this about this person, which I just think is like,
I will walk into somewhere and when other people aren't comfy, I know immediately because I am so uncomfy.
Like you feel
if
it.
I walk
Like,
into a room and people are not like, if don't like themselves or are not comfortable with themselves or like what they're doing, like that kind of tension, it's like palpable. Like I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah, I'll feel it in my cheeks. My cheeks feel like they're stabbing.
I
when I
forget what to do with my body. Like I like how do I hold my face normally? Like
I'll go into a double
what's
chin.
happening? Okay, last one. Self-growth. Oh, sorry, go on.
On relationship, because I think that this one is like, also could be another rabbit hole we'll save. But like my disability with ADHD, which I have read in multiple books now, that is one of the most painful parts of having ADHD is rejection sensitive dysphoria. Ooh. And while I've worked on that in career where like I can get rejection from work and I'm actually fine with it. Like I actually have decapitalized myself so much to where like I don't associate my self-worth with career. But when it comes to relationships, I struggle so fucking hard with being rejected in whatever form.
What's so interesting,
and it's debilitating to me.
I healed that part of myself drastically because I worked really hard on my own like insecurities and stuff like that, to the point where when it comes to like relationships, I am not insecure, but what I am insecure about is when people reject my intelligence, because that is what I find as my worth. But I know, like, I mean, deep down, like, I know that I just have worth as a human being by being a good person. But because for so long of my life, I was treated like my only worth was my physical appearance, and that my intelligence was irrelevant, and like I was treated like I was stupid for so long just because of the way people perceived me as like attractive as when I was younger, and like that would make me so fucking mad. And I was like, I worked so hard to like combat that, that it's like that is what I struggle with. If I feel like somebody is treating me as if I'm like stupid, or like, that makes me really like upset.
So I imagine like rejection sensitive dysphoria is just a direct line and like a spotlight onto trauma, LOL.
Trauma!
But also the deepest parts of you that are most insecure, and the reason it's so clear, I guess, is because rejection sensitive dysphoria is such an illumination of that. It's such an exasperation of like that feeling where like most people might hurt from rejection, but like it feels like you're dying. And I think that for me, like I find so much value in the people around me that the idea of that going away, or the idea of like not being worthy of that, is like terrifying. So that's my work right now. So I think that's interesting that we have different sensitive.
I've also been in a relationship for 10 years.
Yes. Also
that one that is happy and healthy, and I feel very secure in.
Yeah, and I've been in
so
multiple
I've been
long-term
able to
relationships
heal
over 10 years.
that over that time.
Right.
So, but I still live in a world where women are degraded and not seen as intelligent and all that jazz. So that's one that's still stuck with me. But, okay. Self-growth. This one, I don't know if I see the disability because it's so superpower. We are so introspective. So introspective. So as long as we're not masking. So I guess I can go into the disability bit too. So like if I think about myself growing up, right, I was full mask because I had no clue that I was autistic. I had no clue that I had severe ADHD until I was 17 years old, and I was emulating what I thought I was supposed to be. And that turned out to be a fucking stereotype. Like straight out of Mean Girls, cheerleader, like I was just a fucking stereotype. I partied like crazy. I had so much self-hate though, which shows me that it was not me. Those things were not me. When I would go home every day and hate myself after doing those things. And so once I kind of got away from the world that I thought I had to be, so I left my hometown, and that kind of gave me the space to actually think about who I was. And once I was doing that, I was able to unmask a lot more and then begin to my journey of self-growth. So like, we have the ability to be so introspective, and I think that is one of our biggest superpowers. Absolutely. Is that our introspection to understand ourselves also helps us to understand others. And it just helps us grow into the best version of ourselves that we possibly can be, as long as we stop emulating long enough to be introspective.
Yeah, and that's very powerful. I completely agree with that, because I mean, I wrote down hyper focus. I think that is in self-growth, I can get into these modes of like, for like literally 6 months, I will go hard as fuck in the self-growth department. Like, I will be reading books. I will be I went for a year on like all organic, non-toxic, this, that, and it's like, that's not to say that that is the growth so much as it's like, I did that for a year straight, was able to pull myself back into a place of balance and be able to incorporate what I learned from that into a more balanced setting with the rest of my life. And I feel like when you have something like neurodivergence or ADHD or whatever, you are able to fast track your way into something like that, and then take quick learnings from it.
Reminds me a lot of the disability part too, though, because with ADHD especially, we cannot form habits. So a normal neurotypical person, a person without ADHD, can wake up in the morning and be like, all right, now it's time to take a shower, now it's time to brush my teeth, yada yada yada. They do the same thing every day. Nope. I'm sorry.
It's gonna be a no for me.
I brush my teeth when I remember, when something triggers it. So I have to have all of these little reminders around my house to remember to do those basic habit things that I have done every day of my life for 29 years. So like, you would think it would be a habit, but it's not. I brush my teeth when I go like this, and I notice that I didn't brush my teeth, and I could feel it. So then I go brush my teeth. When I wake up in the morning, if I don't look and see my water bottle and go to fill up my water bottle, I will not take my meds.
Yeah, and for me, it's like, sometimes I won't brush my teeth, like, sometimes I will not brush my teeth until I have a social obligation. I like, until I leave, or I leave the house. Like, it doesn't even have to be that I'm meeting anybody. It's like, okay, going to Walmart for something.
And I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't brush my teeth.
I'll remember to brush my teeth before I leave the house. But it's like,
because that's your trigger.
Because like, but if I'll go all day without brushing my teeth, if I'm just like in the house. So sometimes being in the house for too long obviously will be detrimental for me. Which is funny, because that's the exact like, that's my self-growth disability, which is paralysis. Like, I will.
Oh my God, yes.
So as much as I can go hard for a year in the department of self-growth and like doing all these really amazing things for myself and just being so fucking dialed into it and doing it like incredibly, I can also spend 6 months doing absolutely nothing. And
time blind too.
And then like the shame will build from that, and like whatever.
You add that onto the paralysis onto being time blind, and that's how it goes 6 months. Because for us, that 6 months we might have thought was 2. Like, I've put off a doctor's appointment that I was like missed in December, and went to schedule it. Like, I was trying to reschedule that. I didn't fucking end up rescheduling it for 4 months. And I was like, I swear to God, it had only been 2 weeks. And I was just, I'm so timeline that like, it really fucks with that. So like, that's a tough one for sure. But I get paralysis real bad too.
Or I'll have the opposite effect of, I will be so hypersensitive to time. Like I will be obsessed with time as a trauma response of
Oh yeah,
that.
yeah. I'm never late for
that,
anything.
And that triggers
I'm
my
always
anxiety.
15 minutes early. Yes.
So that
I
triggers
get
my
so
anxiety.
anxious too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I typically, I've worked on this a lot to allow myself to be late because I was experiencing such heavy anxiety that like I would be so on time or early to things that it was like
I've only gotten better because of that one.
Yeah, you gotta have somebody without ADHD in your life to like.
No, he's not ADHD. He's just inattentive, but he's also Hispanic.
Got it. Oh, okay. So there's that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I think is my biggest struggle with self-growth is like these stages where I have to give myself grace and permission to just like be like, it's okay, you're experiencing something that other people don't experience, which is you will, even this morning, like getting out of bed, like I had to motivate myself to get out of bed and away from scrolling TikTok because I know if I start the day scrolling TikTok, I am
not going to do anything all day.
Yeah, and it's to an extreme. It's like every day will experience that, but I think that it needs to be recognized that someone specifically with like ADHD, like it is so much harder
and then
for us to find that will.
hyperfixation is the same too. Like she was coming over today at 12 to 1 o'clock and I told Mark that, and then I started cleaning out and getting donations together at like 9:30. And I did not stop and I did not check my phone and I did not eat and I did not drink, and then I was like, Mark, what time is it? And it was 12:40, and then I checked my phone and she was gonna get here at 12:40, and I was like, oh well, good thing.
And in order for me to get here at 12:40, I only checked my phone 3,000 times to make sure that I was going to get here at 12:40.
So it's both.
So it's
like the same too.
Yeah,
that's crazy. But and speaking of that obnoxious ability to like freak out over time, I'm looking at that and seeing it's 44 minutes, and I'm like, well, we gotta have like a good number to get off on. So wanted to round it off with like a cap of neurodivergence. So neurodivergence can be a bunch of different things. For us in our main experience, we're talking from the ADHD perspective. That plus the acquired as well, because I grew up gifted, and the other mental health issues side of things. I cannot speak for people with Tourette's or even other people with ADHD because we all have different experiences. But basically the whole concept that we want everybody to understand is that neurodivergence is just a different way for our brains to work, and that it is as much as of a superpower as it is a disability. And because people so often just say disabled, this is wrong, but like we said, I would never want to change anything about my brain.
Absolutely not. And I think that
I think it's an amazing thing.
This is content that is so needed in the current world that we live in, because even as I look for things to talk about on this, it's that much more that I realize that this type of stuff needs to exist, and conversations and shared experiences need to happen so that people can feel like seen in those moments for themselves of like, oh, okay, I'm not the only person that's like dealing with this. And also the way that you and I are both like incredibly vulnerable on camera and talking about the ways that we prepped for this.
Books.
Yeah. And it's like, it's very healing, and we're just educating people in the process. I think it's cool stuff.
All right, so let's sign off together. I'm Nicole.
I'm Allie.
And this was Acknowledge Knowledge.
Finger guns.